Hello, everyone. Welcome to Inconvenient Truths. I'm your host, Jennifer Zheng. From April 8th to 10th, the CCP's People's Liberation Army's Eastern Theater Command completed a military exercise called Joint Sword, targeting Taiwan and simulated precise strikes on critical targets in the Taiwan Strait and surrounding waters. Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense immediately responded by releasing videos showcasing the combat readiness of its troops and claimed to have a tight grip on the surrounding situation. Meanwhile, the United States immediately announced that its missile destroyer had just conducted a freedom of navigation operation in the South China Sea. The situation in the Taiwan Strait seems to be on the brink of eruption, and some predict that the CCP's invasion of Taiwan may be imminent. Today, I'd like to share some important information on this issue as well as my perspective. Currently, there are three main viewpoints regarding whether the CCP will attack Taiwan and how they might do so. The first viewpoint is represented by YouTuber and Professor Zhang Tianliang. He believes that the CCP will absolutely not attack Taiwan because their economic and military capabilities will not allow it. Xi Jinping is even afraid to put guns in the hands of soldiers because he doesn't know who the soldiers will shoot at after they have guns. Also, the generals of the People's Liberation Army are both corrupt and afraid of death and are not willing to sacrifice their lives for the CCP. Plus, a lot of them have a large amount of money in the US. They will oppose the war as they will fear sanctions from the US. The second viewpoint is represented by former Peking University law professor Yuan Hongbin. He claims to have insider information from within the CCP that Xi Jinping has already decided to engage in a decisive battle with the US in the Taiwan Strait, and it will be a hot war. The time frame is between 2022 and 2027, and I will explain more of the details he disclosed later. The host of Zooming In with Simon Gao holds a third perspective. She wrote in a Wall Street Journal, infiltration, intimidating, and co-opting the opposition would be less costly than an invasion. In her view, a military attack on Taiwan may only be the CCP's plan B. The more likely scenario is a less costly takeover of Taiwan through a time-tested party strategy called the United Front. Now let me discuss in more detail the information revealed by Yuan Hongbin, and then I'll talk about what I think about this matter. Yuan Hongbin said that because China's economic decline is inevitable, the era of using economic growth as the legitimacy of the CCP's rule is over. For Xi Jinping, the so-called great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation has become the only excuse for him to stay in power. Yuan Hongbin said, Xi Jinping and his co-Politburo Standing Committee members are the worst and the most foolish people who grew up during the China's Cultural Revolution, and their souls are cursed by the ghosts of Karl Marx and Mao Zedong. Therefore, what Xi Jinping calls the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation is actually the dream of achieving communist rule over the world. From this perspective, Xi Jinping is determined to bring the Chinese nation and the world to war. This is also the fate that Xi Jinping has imposed on humanity in the 21st century. Sima Gao also says that according to the internal information she received, the reason why the CCP allowed Xi Jinping to amend the constitution so that he could be in power forever is that Xi Jinping had made a promise to the CCP he would reclaim Taiwan with his power. Some people also say that Xi Jinping has already added titles such as Great Revolutionary and Great Thinker to his name. However, if he wants to be on par with Mao Zedong and become a great military strategist, taking Taiwan is a necessary achievement. 2027 is the 100th anniversary of the founding of the People's Liberation Army. So if Xi Jinping can take Taiwan before 2027, he will have earned his great military strategist title. According to Yuan Hongbin, Xi Jinping has actually put China into a state of wartime readiness. For example, the so-called supply and marketing cooperative system from the planned economy era has been reorganized into a supply system for the wartime economy. Additionally, China has recently established a national defense mobilization system from the central to local levels. And as we reported earlier, cities of all sizes in China have established national defense mobilization offices. Yuan Hongbin also said that according to internal CCP information, through the National Defense Mobilization System, the CCP has recruited over 7 million reserve soldiers and has also established a combat series consisting of armies, divisions, regiments, and battalions to prepare for large-scale wars. Local armed forces departments of the CCP at all levels have recently completed the registration and filing work of 42 million militia members. Furthermore, prior to the 20th National Congress of the CCP, Xi Jinping instructed the Central Commission for Discipline Inspection to increase efforts to crack down on corrupt officials before 2025. The rectification of officials must achieve both political and economic success, and at least 1.5 trillion yuan or 220 billion US dollars of illegally acquired assets must be confiscated from those officials, and the money obtained through this will mainly be invested in the so-called military struggle preparation. A considerable part will be used to increase the number of China's nuclear warheads to 1,000 by 2025. Yuan Hongbin also said that Xi Jinping further strengthened strategic alliance with Russia through his visit to Moscow. Putin has promised to meet all of China's oil and natural gas supply needs and a part of its food needs during the war with Taiwan. So what is Xi Jinping's return to Putin? One is to continue to transport large amounts of military supplies to Russia through North Korea and Iran, using North Korea and Iran as white gloves to provide military aid to Russia. At the same time, North Korea is training and equipping a special force unit of 40,000 soldiers to support Russia, and all of the equipment and supplies for this unit are provided by the CCP. The CCP is doing this to ensure that Russia does not suffer a strategic defeat in the conventional war with Ukraine. In addition, the CCP has rapidly upgraded North Korea's strategic missile and nuclear weapon miniaturization capabilities through financial and technical assistance, thereby forming a powerful strategic deterrent against Japan and South Korea. Furthermore, the CCP has further strengthened its strategic allies with Iran by facilitating diplomatic reconciliation between Iran and Saudi Arabia, thereby putting the U.S. at a strategic disadvantage in the Middle East. In addition, according to Xi Jinping's instructions, the CCP's Foreign Affairs Department is strengthening its political and economic ties with the Communist parties in India and Nepal, and it is beginning to provide large amounts of weapons and equipment to the guerrilla groups led by the Communist Party of India. This is to prepare to divide India from within in the event of a military conflict. Yuan Hongbin also argued that the reason why some people think Xi Jinping will not attack Taiwan is that it is irrational to do so. However, these people forgot that most of the policies Xi Jinping has implemented have been irrational, such as destroying the private economy, imposing a 3-year lockdown, launching wolf warrant diplomacy, and becoming isolated in the international community, etc. All those are irrational, but Xi Jinping has still implemented them anyway. Well, how do I look at these issues? I believe that it is highly likely that the CCP will invade Taiwan. In addition to the reason Yuan Hongbin mentioned, which is that Xi Jinping is a fanatical follower of communist ideology, another important reason is the various serious crises that cannot be resolved within Chinese society. Some people say that if there is no revolution within Chinese society, then a war with other countries will inevitably occur. Chinese society is on the very verge of collapsing without a war. Therefore, a war could actually bring opportunities for the CCP amidst the new uncertainties. At this point, I would like to share a speech given by an expert in China, in which he clearly stated that it would be easy for China to defeat the US because China has a socialist system that can only show its advantages in times of war and chaos, but not during peacetime.
因为很简单，我们的政治制度是2.0版本，他们是1.0。你现在明白了？我们是高维打低维，因为社会主义这个制度啊，在和平年代是看不到优势的。社会主义制度只有在战乱年代，在乱的年代才能看到优势。不是咱有多伟大，而是对方不行。现在你们发现一件事情，联合国是美国人干嘛发明、创造并搞起来的，但你发现现在联合国变成我们的工具了。我们提个议案通过，提个议案通过，美国提议案不通过，提个议案不通过。美国都要气死了，为什么美国特朗普要退群啊？你以为他神经病啊？他退群是因为他每次提议案通过不了，因为他们的主张是什么主张？少数服从什么来？多数嘛，民主嘛，投票制嘛。但是他忘记了，联合国是全世界人民的联合国，对吗？那个国家只有1000万人，但是他有1票呀。可是咱们中国人永远是和第三世界人在一起的呢，穷鬼民是最多的呀。所以我们在国内，我们也是干嘛？毛把蒋赶走了，在国际上我们还是这一招，照样联合穷鬼们就把那帮有钱的人给弄下去。现在玩的是世界人民大革命，你听懂没？
Well, perhaps what he referred to as the great revolution of the world's people at the end of the video is the final battle by the CCP and its new evil axis against the world. As for how the CCP will unify Taiwan, I'm inclined to agree with Simon Gao's view that a combination of united front work and blockade may be the best choice for the CCP. At the same time, all signs indicate that the CCP is actively preparing for war. Yuan Hongbin also said that this year the overall strategy of the CCP is to penetrate Taiwan's society more deeply through various united front operations, such as to gain the upper hand in the cognitive and public opinion wars in the 2023 Taiwan election campaign. Then the CCP will do everything possible to prevent the diplomatic Progressive Party's presidential candidate from winning the 2024 election, or, in other words, do everything possible to support the presidential candidate put forward by the Kuomintang. As far as I can see, the CCP's best option is to create chaos within Taiwan in order to weaken the will of Taiwan's society to resist the CCP and ultimately achieve the so-called peaceful resolution of the Taiwan issue, that is, to conquer Taiwan without a fight. Let's take a look at another very short video. In the street of Taipei, people are openly shouting and welcoming the People's Liberation Army to Taiwan to protect people's lives and property.
保护我们的台台，来保护我们台湾，保护我们的生命，保护我们的生命，不要让小孩当炮灰。
Well, you know, the so-called peaceful liberation was already implemented by the CCP in 1949. Beijing was handed over to the CCP by Fu Zuoyi, the commander of the nationalist army stationed there at the time. And this is a picture of the People's Liberation Army entering Beijing's Zhenyang Gate. That was a major victory for the CCP's so-called united front work. Fu Zuoyi's main confidant, Yan Youwen was an underground member of the CCP. Fu Zuoyi's every thought and war plan was passed on to Mao Zedong by Yuan Youwen. And more importantly, Fu Zuoyi's daughter Fu Dong was also a secret member of the CCP. In November 1948, the CCP sent her to be by Fu Zuoyi's side to persuade her father to surrender and to establish a channel of communication between the two sides. This was the key reason why the CCP was ultimately able to peacefully liberate Beijing. So after watching the video of people waving red flags and shouting to welcome the People's Liberation Army to protect the lives and property of the people in Taiwan on the streets of Taipei, who can say that the thing of peaceful liberation of Beijing will not happen again in Taiwan? It must be pointed out that causing chaos within the United States, tearing American society apart and making Americans fight among themselves and losing the will to defend Taiwan is also one of the CCP's important strategic goals. I don't know how exactly the CCP is doing this, but from what has been happening in the US, we can indeed see that the internal rifts in American society are deepening. Some even predict that there will be turmoil or even another civil war in the US after the next election. So for me, this is also very worrying. Let's take a look at the video released by the CCP's Xinhua News Agency about the Chinese military exercises in the past few days. I don't really understand military affairs, and I can't tell how powerful the weapons demonstrated in the video really are. However, what I can see is that the CCP released this propaganda video in a very high-profile way, and its intention is, of course, to create psychological pressure on the Taiwanese people. At the same time, the CCP's repeated military exercises may not be just exercises. They may really be slowing implementing a blockade of Taiwan. If the CCP only surrounds Taiwan without attacking, but cuts off Taiwan's commercial channels with the outside world, and at the same time use high-pressure psychological and cognitive warfare to make the Taiwanese people lose their will to resist. If there are people on the island who voluntarily raise the white flag to welcome the PLA to protect them, then the US and the international community would not be able to easily intervene militarily because this would truly become China's domestic affair. This is the CCP's best choice. If the result of Taiwan's presidential election in 2024 is not what the CCP wants, then it is possible for the CCP to organize large-scale assassination activities in Taiwan, assassinating the major anti-communist political leaders to create chaos and so on. In fact, the most terrifying aspect of the CCP lies not in its economic and military strength, but in its unrestricted warfare that doesn't have a bottom line. And these are the things that I really want to remind the international community to guard against first. Well, that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. Please double check if you are still subscribed to my channel, as YouTube keeps taking off my subscribers. And if you like my content, please spread my channel and videos, or go to my website at jenniferzengblog.com and jenniferzengblog.com. Sign up for a membership or make a donation to support my truth-telling efforts. Thank you. See you next time.